can tell the forecast for today is outstanding because all these gliders are lined up to launch. I got ready a bit on the late side, and when I finally towed out to the lineup, all those gliders were already there. But none of them wanted to go at 11:30, so I skipped to the front of the line and was the first to get a tow. This stroke of luck turned out to be crucial. As soon as I launched, the rest of the fleet started too. There was only one tow plane, and if I had to wait at the back of the line, I would have launched 2 hours later. It's a bit nerve-wracking launching first in front of all these very experienced pilots. It would be pretty embarrassing to fail to find a thermal and have to land again after 20 minutes. Jockeying for position in the launch queue is part of the soaring game, unfortunately. One way to get ahead is to launch before the thermals really start going. It's a risky move because if you're too early, you're going to end up back on the ground in no time. At the moment, there are no signs of thermals from what I could see on the ground. Hopefully, in the time it takes for me to get towed up, the thermals will start working. I'm willing to take this risk today because I'm going to try to beat my personal best distance of 787 kilometers. In order to cover the maximum distance possible, I have to launch as soon as the thermals start rising and fly as late into the day as I dare. In addition, I fully ballasted my glider with 300 pounds of water, which will make climbing in weak lift extra challenging. I'm off tow now, and I'm approaching Mineral Peak, the low hill straight in front of me. Freestanding peaks like this one are good thermal generators, and I figured if there's a thermal anywhere, it'll be here. However, as I arrive, I find only broken bubbles of lift, and I'm only barely climbing. I hate circling so close to the terrain like this. According to the GPS log, I'm about 500 feet above the peak, but it sure feels lower than that. The famous Gordon Betger self-launched almost an hour before me, and he also scratched around in this area without finding much. He was apparently even lower than I was, although he didn't circle right above the peak. Slowly but surely, I claw my way up 900 feet, which gives me the altitude to continue on to the ridge in hopes of finding something stronger. As soon as I get there, I see that Minden is getting out of range, and I immediately turn back toward the airport. I'm starting to feel like launching early was a mistake. Suddenly, I run into a thermal, and this time I'm climbing at a decent rate. My gamble has paid off, and now it's game on. I still need to be a little careful though, since I can't be sure if that thermal was an outlier or a sign that thermals will be easy to come by. I soon find another short climb, and now I'm confident that it's time to head out on course. Coming up behind me is Brian Neff, who launched about 20 minutes after me. He seems to be having an easier time climbing than I did, and he's catching up quickly. Even though I launched 20 minutes ahead of him, he's now only a few minutes behind me. That's how it is when you launch early. Those launching after you will find stronger thermals than you did, since the thermal strength is still ramping up early in the day. There are no clouds here, so I'm flying S-curves to find the thermals that I'm expecting to be coming off these higher peaks at the south end of the Pine Nut Range. Here's what the forecast looks like for today. The colored areas show where the clouds will be, and the purple areas are where the cloud bases are over 18,000 feet. The clouds are all to the south, so that's where I'm headed. I'm flying at McCready 2 here to make sure I don't arrive at the clouds too low. Gordon Betger was way out ahead of me, but it looks like he spent a lot of time scratching around down low in these foothills. I almost catch up with him here, and what was once a 50-minute lead ended up shrinking to only a few minutes. Again, we can see how launching early only gets you a slim lead over others. However, sometimes it's more about avoiding the wait for a tow than getting ahead of the guy launching behind you. I arrived at the clouds and had to try a few of them before finding a good climb. When I get a 4 or 5 knot climb, I know the thermals are nearing their maximum strength, and it's time to cruise at high speed. Here, Gordon and I start to diverge. He's headed for the Sierras, and I'm aiming for the White Mountains. I chose the Whites because the forecast called for higher cloud bases en route, and I know that the White Mountains are notorious for high-speed runs, which I'm going to need if I want to set a personal best today. However, I've got a large blue gap to cross, and I'm somewhat desperately searching for one more climb before I set out to cross it. I finally find what I'm looking for and charge out into the blue at McCready 4. What first looked like mere wisps of cloud ahead grow into more substantial cumulus, and I top up once more before crossing the next gap. You can see that Brian Neff took a less direct route toward the whites, and that allows me to increase my lead over him a little bit. I dialed back my cruise speed on the next glide because it looks completely blue ahead, but watch as another cloud materializes right in front of me. This was a fresh thermal, full of energy, and I rocketed up at 7 knots. Meanwhile, Gordon Betger is leaving me in the dust. Look at that long glide he's on, with no thermaling at all. He must be in some great convergence. My last climb took me to nearly 18,000 feet, and I can easily make it to Boundary Peak, at the north end of the White Mountains. This will be my first time flying the Whites this year, and it sure looks like a good day to do it. There's a line of clouds running down the entire range, and into the next range, which is called the yoyos. I'm licking my lips in anticipation of the feast laid out before me. I'm not quite in the good stuff yet, though. I take a couple of short climbs that net 1,000 feet and get me near cloud base. Brian Neff arrives at Boundary Peak, but he's about 2,500 feet below me. The White Mountains are famous for the strong convergence that often forms along them, and it's often possible to fly straight for great distances without circling. However, I make a silly decision to try to climb in a very weak thermal. This is painful to watch. Why in the world did I do this? I'm very high, flying in convergence, and have no need to climb right now. This allows Brian Neff to nearly catch up with me. With that behind me, the real fun begins. This is the stuff of which glider dreams are made of. 211 kilometers without turning and barely losing altitude. My glide ratio is 540 to 1. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did, but I doubt it. At the point where I turned back north, 4 gliders converged. Gordon Betger crossed over from the Sierras to the yoyos, and my friend David Crowder showed up, flying from Tehachapi. Brian Neff continues south into increasingly smaller clouds, while Gordon and David chased me back up the yoyos. Here I came to an interesting decision point. I want to continue flying straight north, but the cloud street takes a bend to the left here. Should I follow the clouds or go straight and climb to regain the altitude later? It's not an insignificant detour to follow the clouds, so I decide to go straight into the blue. Gordon decides to follow the clouds. which one of us will come out ahead. Gordon comes zooming up behind me, then diverts to the left. At this point, I'm about 1,600 feet above him and slightly ahead. Gordon climbs as he's cruising under the clouds, and we reconverge here. At this point, I'm about the same distance in front of him before we diverged, but he has gained about 700 feet on me. So his route was better. His glider is a little better than mine, but most of the difference is due to his better route choice. Lesson learned. I should mention that he's not flying alone. Nicholas Bennett is in the Arcus J with him. Sadly, I've come to the end of the White Mountains, and I'm headed north across the same blue gap I came through on the way south. As I'm leaving, it occurs to me that I could run back down the White Mountains for another round. But my glider pilot's instinct is to get back home. I'm not yet thinking that this flight could be a personal best for me, but in retrospect, I wish I was. Brian Neff is still in my 6, along with Dennis Linnekin. At this point, I see that I could easily make it back to Minden, but it's only 4:15, and the forecast indicated that the lift won't die off until 6:30. I decide to head back south under these great clouds and do a yo-yo, which is when you double back over an area that you've already been through. Now I'm starting to think that this flight could turn into a personal best. I'm going to stretch the flight for as long as I can, and hopefully break 800 kilometers. After a couple of easy yo-yos, I'm starting to get a bit tired. I can see on my glide computer that I'll make 900 kilometers if I head home now, and I have Minden and glide. I'm home free, and just as I begin to celebrate, this happens. Watch in the red oval for a green light to come on. That little black box next to my knee is a mountain-high oxygen system. It's sounding an alarm because there's no oxygen flowing through it anymore. But I'm cruising at 100 knots, and I can't hear it because of the wind noise. I finally noticed that no oxygen was coming out, and I pressed a button on the box to increase the oxygen level. It gave me a few more puffs, then quit again. I'm trying to decide what to do. I'm at 14,000 feet, which is too high to breathe without oxygen. Oxygen is required above 12,500 feet. I looked at my glide computer and I saw that I was well above glide to Minden, and I could afford to lose some altitude. I took the little hair clip off my spoiler handle, which is my low-tech gear warning system. I carefully cracked open the spoilers, still doing 100 knots. The glider starts plummeting, and I'm watching my arrival altitude over Minden shrink. Soon I'm at 12,500 feet, and I'm safe. Phew. That was a close one. When I took off, my oxygen bottle was more than half full. In the past, even my longest flights didn't require more than half a tank. However, when I was on the White Mountains earlier, I had started to feel a little lightheaded. So I bumped up the oxygen setting from D10 to F10, which gives me more oxygen per breath. I left it there for a while, then changed it back when I started feeling better. But a while later, the cycle repeated itself, and I kept switching back and forth for the rest of the flight. I was using more oxygen than usual, and what I had on board was not quite enough to last the rest of the flight. I was lucky it didn't run out earlier. I would have had to land at the nearest airport, or maybe tiptoe back to Minden below 12,500, which would have been tricky. From now on, I'll always fill my oxygen tank if there's any chance of it being a long flight. Woo! 900K. That feels good. Finally did it. Every year I've set a new personal best, except for last year, which was disappointing. This more than makes up for it. I hoped to break 800 kilometers this year, and I broke 900 instead. The season isn't over yet, and I feel like 1,000 kilometers is within reach now. Let's take a look at my sprint speed, which is the speed for the fastest 2 hours of the flight. 160 kilometers per hour is also a personal best for me. That was when I was flying on the White Mountains with barely any circling. I always look at my average climb rate for the flight, which in this case is a surprising 3.8 knots. That's not very high, but that's because I spent a lot of time climbing slowly at the beginning of the flight, and then didn't do a lot of circling after that, which is a good thing. 18% circling is great, and is a big reason for my high speed on this flight. I learned something from every flight, and this was no exception. Starting early really paid off, but the timing has to be just right. It's better to follow the clouds, even if it requires a significant detour. And always fill your oxygen before a long flight. You never know when you might need a bit extra. Thanks for watching. See you next time.